Yo, ladies and gentlemen, it's your boy Rfarleydude97 here. We're gonna be doing something a little bit different today. If you saw my previous stream, I did mention that there'll be new content coming out soon. This is one of them. Basically, what we're doing here today is talking about the Toy Story franchise. So yes, Toy Story 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're gonna be talking about those movies, how we feel about it, and just our overall opinion. And today, I have with me, if you haven't seen the screen already or the title, are my two buddies, Tyrone and Terrell. How you fine gentlemen doing on this day?
You are a toy! You're a child's plaything!
Hello, everybody. Everyone's well.
Sad, strange little man. I bid you pity. but no,
I don't
good
believe in references. I believe in introductions. Hello.
introductions. But no, good to hear that you guys are doing well. But no, yeah, like I said, we're gonna be talking about the Toy Story franchise. There wasn't really any particular reason. I think one day we were all just watching the movies. And after we finished the fourth one, I was just like, you know what? Why don't we get together and just talk about the four movies and give our honest opinion about it? Since we've seen the movies within recent time, the memory is still kind of like fresh. So I figured, let's just go ahead and put it. Obviously, the way we're going to do this, ladies and gentlemen, in case you're wondering, is that we're going to be starting with the first movie. Then we're going to go all the way to the fourth movie. And for those of you probably wondering, no, we are not doing the we're not doing like the shorts that they did after the third movie and the what if Forky series and the Bo Peep short that they did, because those don't really matter really anyway. So we're obviously just going to talk about the first four movies. So, but with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the first one. So yeah, Toy Story 1 came out in November 1995, and the basic premise is that Woody is the main character of the whole room, and one day Andy has his birthday party like a week early because they're moving the next day or the next week. So everything's going fine. They see the gifts. Then Buzz Lightyear comes out of nowhere, and now Woody feels threatened because obviously his position in the room is kind of changed because Buzz Lightyear's this brand new toy that Andy loves so much that that Woody obviously feels jealous. And then we get into the whole thing with Sid being this little kid blowing up toys. Rest in peace to that G.I. Joe. And basically the whole movie is just I would say the movie is more so of a buddy type of movie where it's just like two unlikely forces at the time work together to solve a common goal, I guess, amongst one another. Although technically Buzz didn't really catch on to the threat of it until later on, because obviously he was still being under the impression that he was an actual Buzz Lightyear. So while that maybe wasn't the best way of describing the premise, but basically it's that sort of fashion of a movie. So the way we're gonna do this is that I'm gonna ask these two what their thoughts about the movie are, and then I'll go last because I want to make sure the guests feel right at home. So I guess I'll start with Terrell for the first one. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, in regards to Toy Story 1, because obviously Toy Story 1 came out in 1995, and like people sometimes say, oh, well, certain movies hold up still pretty damn well after all these years. I guess the first question is, do you feel like Toy Story 1 is in the case where it aged like fine wine, where you can literally just watch it anytime and it would still be just as good? Or do you feel like the movie just kind of fell off in that department?
Well, I can't say if it aged like fine wine, as see, I don't drink, so I don't know what wine tastes like. I'm gonna
All right. How about we go with vodka? How about that?
Alcohol. How would that be any better?
I don't know what you drink.
I don't drink, Richie.
All right, we'll go with the milk. We'll go with the milk.
I'm just saying, if I don't drink alcohol, that would include vodka, but it's fine. The point is, it's one of those films I was generally surprised because we rewatched it maybe a couple weeks ago. That shit still looks good. Now, obviously, if you go from 1 to 4, there is a lot of visual differences you notice. But one doesn't, put it this way, you can play one and not realize that it's like as old as it is. And I didn't see one in the theaters. I saw one like on video when I got it home for the first time. Visually, it still looks great. I don't really have any issues with the way it looks. There aren't even really any. There's a few weird animations, but for the most part, you wouldn't notice. There's a few things that stick out more than others. Like I think Sid's dog has his moments of, oh, it's a 3D model, and you can really tell it's a 3D model. But Sid's dog isn't even until like the latter half of the movie, and he's not used that often. You hear him more than you see him. So yeah, I think visually it looks great though.
Same goes for you, Tyrone. How do you feel about like when you look at it now compared to what it was before from your other times of watching the movie? Do you feel like it kind of aged well enough for you, or is it kind of fallen off in that department?
Looking back, with Toy Story, knowing that the other 3 movies after this one exist, for the most part, seeing Woody and the characters primarily is fine because it's very clear that Pixar knew their limits, so they kept it primarily from the toys' perspective. And then later, obviously, because the movie's still about the toys in the other movies, it's primarily still on the toys. However, now they're not shy about showing people later on, because in later movies they get better at animation and artwork. In the first movie, like Terrell said, I think the only things that stick out are the human characters and the dog, and like the running patterns that some of the human characters have, the motion quirks, things like that, which I think is kind of weird, only because there's some toys that are based off of, like, primarily people. You got Woody, Buzz, and Bo Peep for the most part that are based more or less off of real people. With Bo Peep, she sticks out like a sore thumb, but obviously we'll get to her much later.
Yeah, very much later. Don't you worry, folks.
But if we're talking Woody and Buzz, like, other than a few abstract features on their faces, they don't look that different than like your average person, with obviously Woody having like some exaggerated features because he's a toy, and Buzz primarily in a spacesuit with only his face really being visible. And even that's done in like a Disney-like fashion. It's very clear that this is going to become a Disney product at some point. Even though I believe the first movie is strictly Pixar, right?
Yeah, for the first one, I believe. Yeah. I think the first 2 are.
Yeah, I think the first 2 are, and then later Disney.
Yeah, the third and fourth one became more of a Disney thing.
It's corporal grip on it. Yep. But like, since it's primarily on the toys, with Sid being the only one that has a primary camera focus, and I mean he's a villain, so he's allowed to look as exaggerated and evil as they really want him to be. It's not that bad. Like, it's not glaring towards the eyes. It's not an eyesore. It's definitely a very comfortable look.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I mean, for me, real quick, is that I think watching the later movies and then coming back to this one, I can definitely say that I can watch this movie and kind of just point out like the very obvious animation errors, which granted are going to happen because it's not like this movie was like perfect on every aspect. There are some things they messed up on, but I just think, I don't know if this is a benefit, or actually I don't think it is. It's just one of those things where it's like you watch more of the newer movies and then you come back watching the older ones of the same type, you're going to be very prone to see like very obvious animation errors or some parts of it that were that just stick out to you just because you're so used to like, or what's coming up afterwards. So, and it's a good thing that you mentioned about Woody and Buzz, because that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. Because a lot of the things I liked about the first movie is just kind of like, obviously it sets the foundation for 2D's characters because they're going to be the most important ones. Well, at least up until the third movie anyways, but we'll get to that later. But so I guess, Tyrone, I'll ask you for this one first is, I know we can't really say much because, we got to talk about 2, 3, and 4, but like at the very least, when you look at the characters of both Woody and Buzz, how do you feel like they were executed? Do you feel like it was executed pretty well for like the first movie, or do you feel like they could have done better in certain departments? And if so, how?
It's actually funny, because I remember I don't know if you remember it, but I remember they had if you get like the DVDs, they have like a director's commentary where they stated that Woody was actually supposed to be evil.
Oh no, yeah, I have both of those CDs.
Yeah, he was actually supposed to be a bit more antagonizing than he would be. Mm-hmm. But I think at last minute they decided against it only because Woody being a sheriff, a cowboy, and a toy to a good kid like Andy, it would be very offsetting, I guess, for him to have been portrayed as like the bad guy. But I could definitely see that the formula was there. Toy gets jealous of other toy and thus, wants to become the top dog toy, and that builds the ingredients for him being an antagonist. That the layout is definitely there. I think what changed though is that they figured that they could like have a three-dimensional character in the sense that it's not just him getting jealous of Buzz. It's him getting jealous of Buzz, but still trying to maintain order in the in Andy's room. Because while obviously he knows his status as the top toy, he also knows that Andy plays with other toys as well, and thus his character growth comes from him realizing that just like me, I'm no different. Even though I'm his favorite, I'm no different than any other toy that Andy has, and I care more about Andy than I do my status. And I liked that like mental journey he had to go through, while at the same time trying to get Buzz to like maintain that level of toy humanity. Because obviously Buzz is a joke that I think is actually pretty ingenious when you stop to think about it. What if a toy that is conscious sticks strictly with their origin story and plays it straight? And it's a hilarious idea on paper, uh, but it does lead to some contradictions. Like if the toys know they're toys, then how does Buzz be immobile when Andy enters the room, but Buzz doesn't know he's a toy? It brings that weird colloquial question that a lot of people are gonna sort of just nudge away and go, "It's a kids movie. Shut the fuck up."
Yeah, well, fuck you for thinking, I guess.
I mean, yeah, it leads to that, but I guess the idea is, he probably is very he adapts to his environment. So when everybody else is motionless, he is too, and I guess he plays along. But if we're looking, but that's digging too much into the details of it. The dynamic of it does work though, where he has to realize his place and and his role as Andy's toy. And he comes to accept that he has to give up one lifestyle that he thought he lived in order to live a lifestyle that, in and of itself, while it feels narrow, it's like you're a child's toy and nothing more. But a child has a large, vast level of imagination, so it gives the ability to give into this new giving lifestyle that while you're giving up something, you're giving a child joy. I guess that's the premise. So I do like how the dynamic between these two characters grows as the journey to come back home is said. Because if you look at it, the journey to come back home isn't even a physical one; it's a metaphorical one. As in, they're both coming back as better people. Woody's coming back as as a more humble character that's accepting of all toys, Buzz included, while Buzz is coming back as a person who's not distancing himself because he believes that he's the space ranger that's supposed to defeat Zurg. Instead, he is a toy that belongs to a child that is given, and that role is going to give a child joy that he will carry for the rest of his life as memory. So it's a nice premise and a nice idea.
Right. Before we hand it off to Terrell, was there something about it that you feel like they could have, done better in or improved on, at least from the first movie, or do you feel like it was at least good enough to start off with, or just that?
I think it's a good premise, and looking back on it, I think I'm as an adult watching it again and looking back on it, I think it's a premise that was pretty solid for its time. 1995, like that's a pretty solid premise, and just due to the fact that originally it was going to be a clear cut Woody doesn't like Buzz because Buzz is the next hot toy. I'm glad they were able to evolve past that and make a bigger theme that kind of sets the tone for the movie, and overall I feel works. I mean, yeah, one of the villains in the movie I'm sure we'll get to later, but since you said Woody and Buzz, I like this premise, and honestly I don't know how the first movie could really like double down or improve upon it. I think when they went back and realized that the one idea wouldn't work and tried another, I think they ultimately chose the better of the two paths.
Oh no, definitely for sure. But before I expand on that, obviously we gotta get the floor to Terrell. So Terrell, same question to you. How do you feel like they handled the premise, and also how do you feel like I guess your overall thoughts on Woody and Buzz's characters as they evolved throughout the movie.
I don't want it to be too redundant, but unfortunately, that's just what's going to happen to a degree. The thing that I always thought was interesting in Woody and Buzz is that in later movies, Woody would gain this kind of like honor, like duty, morality thing, just in his character that is really prevalent in probably 3 and 4, but it's in 2 and it's in 1 to a degree. Like he's always considered a good guy for the most part, but like he really gains those personality traits in the later films. So I always find it interesting that 1 will always be kind of immortalized because it's the main movie and it's the only movie where Woody's like full on dickhead. Like he's on some petty shit because he's the number 1 toy in Andy's room. I also like the physical parallel between being like Woody being a cowboy toy, which is considerably old school, and of course space toys became more popular in the 2000s or late 90s, which is around the time where this movie's made. So I like the fact that they're literally representations of that. There are a few plot things that don't make sense, like the fact that like it's every toy like Buzz when they first come out of the box, where they perceive themselves to be like their actual characters.
Shut the fuck up! It's a children's movie.
yeah. So like that's the price. I almost wish that was like a premise of the other movies. This is the only movie that even gets references, other than maybe the second movie, when we see another Buzz Lightyear go through the same shit. And even in, because it's funny to me that I like the movie because not only is it like this Woody coming to terms with like another toy being as popular as him and befriending that toy and understanding what's greater than himself, which is Andy, to make sure Andy's happy. But Buzz is going through like a midlife crisis. Like this, like Buzz's literal half of his heart is, I'm not real. Like that's like going up to your friend and be like, bro, we're not humans. Where are we? We're forts. No.
I have a theory on the Buzz thing.
What is the theory?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so obviously Woody was made around what, the 60s?
Probably 60s.
I think I think he tells the date in the 4th movie. But Andy has a lot of older toys. All of those toys are older toys. Buzz is literally the newest toy he's got. And my theory is that around the 90s and 2000s, marketing was a big thing. Marketing was like, man, toys were set in market stone, where marketing was very huge. It was this big, like, corporate, we need these toys to sell. And Buzz has an identity when he's marketed. Buzz is marketed as a Space Ranger from the Galactic Federation or whatever, meant to defeat the evil Zurg. He already has a set-in-stone backstory. Whereas, and obviously the second movie's kind of gonna mess with this theory a little, but other toys, older toys, didn't really have much going for them. They were toys and they were sold as toys. Kids didn't need really a big commercialism about them in order to sell them off. Kids would take them and sort of let their imagination decide. You can see it actually when Andy makes a simple piggy bank as what's his
Ham.
No, I know Ham. What's his evil name?
Dr. Evil Porkchop.
Dr. Porkchop. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's an imagination character made strictly from Andy's brain versus Buzz Lightyear, whose backstory is already made out. So when he comes to life as a toy, he's already hardwired with that ideology stuck in his head. Whereas other toys, they didn't have that. They just, whatever came to him is whatever came to him. Slinky doesn't have a huge backstory on Slinky dogs that existed back then, but no, he's just a spring that somebody decided to yeet a dog piece onto. So that's my theory. My theory is that since he's a 90s toy, he's equipped with 90s marketing as his backstory.
Well, I'll piggyback off of it because there's another thing that shows up in the third movie that kind of references that. Remember when they take his backplate off and you realize he has a play mode and then a demo mode?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost implied that like the demo mode is their default mode, and maybe, and not granted, obviously this would have required an insane level of forethought to think that this would even be relevant, and or they would have 3 other movies after the first one. But it could be a simple thing of like him going into that switch mentally or internally and turning himself into play mode instead of demo mode, and that's his character progression. Now, granted, that would imply them realizing that would be a plot point later on in the third film, but that's besides the point.
Right.
But getting back to the movie itself in the 2 characters, like I said, Buzz is going through like a midlife crisis, and then also coming to the reality of like, well, what's important in life. He's essentially lost his purpose, and he has to regain a new one, which he gets from Woody, in the value of making a child smile and being there for the child, whether it's good times or bad. And it's a cool dynamic with a couple of funny gags with like uh Buzz coming apart and then realizing he can't fly, and Woody trying to like get the others' attention who think he murdered him. It's like, it's funny. The premise is really simple. Buzz and Woody have to learn how to live together properly. And like everything in the movie stems around that. On top of Buzz dealing with his like midlife crisis thing that he becomes aware of later on in the film. So I like the dynamic. As far as anything to improve on, I don't really think there's much you can change, because like the journey is the same. He's still gonna have to come to the first thing with Buzz's development is that you got to get him out of the Space Ranger nonsense, and then he can kind of achieve his true purpose. Woody was the hot shit on the block because he's been around. Andy's gotten newer toys since then, and none of them have replaced Woody. Buzz is the only one that provided a real competition for Andy's affection, and he didn't handle it well. So there's not much you can change. I mean, they don't get along because they don't understand each other. It's funny that Woody acts the way Inspector, no, Stinky Pete.
Yeah, Stinky Pete.
Yeah, the way Stinky Pete acts towards the end of the second movie, where he's like, newfangled space toys. That's literally, I don't know if that's exactly a line from Woody, but Woody says something to a similar effect. Like,
it's very clear that Woody would have become jaded as Stinky Pete had enough time had passed without him growing.
Yeah, pretty much. So I don't really have an issue as far as how the movie was handled. I literally argue the first 3 Toy Story movies are perfect. So I genuinely don't have anything I would change about the first film.
Right. And, you know, the reason why I asked that question is because, you know, obviously, you know, again, this is like a movie from like the late 90s. And, you know, sometimes when people go back and watch these movies, they're like, oh, well, it's good in some departments, it's aged fine, but there's some other things they can really work on. But it sounds like Toy Story is one of those things where it's just like, yeah, they could have maybe fixed something here and there just a tiny bit, but I don't think it would have changed the overall plot because it's still really good either way. So, not going to go too redundant here, but what I will say is that I definitely do think that this movie aged pretty damn well. It's definitely, I can always find myself being in awe for the most part of any time I rewatch the movie, because I'm just like amazed by the fact that this film was literally made in the late 90s. Mind you, around the time where computer generated films, well, I'm sure they probably did at least 1 or 2 beforehand, but not as often. But literally the late 90s, I feel like, was just kind of like the foundation of which those movies started to pop up a lot often. So when you see something like this, where not only is it one of the first few, or not one of the first few, but it's one of the first premiere ones, and you see it still fine and dandy nowadays, where it's just really good, that even people nowadays are just like, whoa, this is actually still pretty good. That's when you know this movie really made its mark on like not only the history of it, but just like from an audience perspective.
I will quickly say one.
No, go ahead. All yours.
If since you presented the question about fixing the movie, right? If there was anything that needed to be fixed about it, if you had to sit down and legitimately think about what needs to be fixed with the movie, it probably tells you that the movie's really good on its own right.
Yeah.
Because as a viewer, you're sitting in a theater watching a movie for somewhere around an hour and a half to 2 hours, or nowadays up to 3 to 4 fucking hours.
Yeah. Thanks, Justice League.
You tend to start questioning things during the movie. So the fact that you've watched the movie multiple times and you're sitting down having a discussion, and it's like, what would you change about the movie? And you still got to think about it, probably means the movie's
I
I believe they already asked that question when they made the first shots, and they took and cut out the things that they knew they needed. I remember one time they stated that there was one scene they wish they had kept, where Woody's under the crate and he's talking to Buzz, and they wanted that scene to actually last a little bit longer, so it can fit the tone of what was happening.
Oh no, yeah. That reminds me. Probably for this one we won't go too long, and then obviously we'll talk about Sid, and then our final thoughts, and then we go into the next movie. But that's the other thing too. Is that there were a few moments during the film, especially that scene where when the realization suddenly hit Buzz, which obviously I feel like and I'm sure you guys maybe feel the same way about this, but obviously that moment where he tried to fly and then he just fell all the way down to the floor and his arm just broke, or it came off, I guess. I feel like to me that was when the realization was starting to come in. It wasn't like it didn't came in instantly, but it was slowly starting to come through to him, because it felt like to me it was that moment where it just he started to realize that maybe he isn't what he thought he was. And I think when they had the scene with Woody and Buzz talking during the night with the rain, I think that was when the realization fully came in. And I think I kind of noticed that in the more recent times of watching the movie, because I started to pick up more of like the direction of the character, the mindset, and how they kind of like respond afterwards. So I guess even though it's not really traumatic in the sense that we're normally used to seeing, it's traumatic for Buzz because it's such a big major shift for his character, because he was on one side of it, and then now he's just going from one side to another, but it's so slow, and it's such a momentum shift. But no, yeah, the thing I wanted to ask though is that because there are some moments in the movie I feel like it kind of felt like something should have been there or was going to be there, but then they never re-added it. I imagine this probably won't be much of a discussion, but do you feel, I guess we're talking about the scene specifically because this is the one notable example. Let's just say you watched the movie, and let's say that one particular scene it was in there, like it's completely done, no missing, whatever. Do you feel like that scene would have added a little bit more depth to, I guess, the appreciation of the character development, or do you feel like that scene alone probably wouldn't change as much because again the movies will still be just as good? We'll start with Tyrone.
Making it longer definitely would have helped with the tone a little, but like at the duration and rate that it was going, and taking into consideration theater time, I guess at the time, I think it wouldn't have hurt to be a extended cut for like a DVD edition or whatever. But it doesn't take too much away that it's not that part wasn't included in. I think it still does a good job carrying that tone further, but either way, it was one of those. I very much feel like there was much of a cherry on top situation, where if we put it in, it would have been nice, but if we take it out, the whole thing doesn't fall apart.
Right. And I definitely agree. But and obviously before we get to mine, Tara, how do you feel about it as well? Same question to you.
Yeah, literally, we're not even gonna the sugar. It's literally the same as tolerance. Like, it's a bonus if it's there, but you don't need it because it's not. If the scene didn't exist at all, that's a different story. But it's like saying, do you want your favorite piece of cake, or do you want your favorite piece of cake with a little bit of icing on it? Like, I'm gonna still like the fucking cake regardless. Like, the icing's like, oh, cool icing, but it's not like, oh, damn, fuck me, you didn't put icing on it. I can't eat this, ma. Like, it's good either way. So yeah.
So I guess the one last major thing we can talk about, I'm not sure if maybe this will go on as long, but obviously I did say that we would at some point. But let's talk about Sid. And for those that probably haven't seen the movie in a while or haven't seen it and are probably wondering who the fuck he is, Sid Phillips, this is basically your looks like a teenager somewhere around that area. But basically he's just, I don't know.
He's a preteen. I would say.
Preteen.
He's older than Andy, but he's not like. I say he'd probably be in like.
I would say he's like 12.
Yeah, he's probably in middle school.
12, 13.
I would say he's 12. He's about 12.
He's older than Andy.
12. That's what I would say. Sounds about good. But basically, for those wondering, and probably might not have remembered, Sid Phillips was basically just a preteen, a little bit messed up in terms of like toy abuse. Like he abuses the shit out of his toys. Like, you know, again, literally the first time we see him, he blew up a fucking a soldier doll. And then later on, as we go into his room, we see like he's done a lot more than just that. Like, you know, for example, you know, he'll put like a fucking Barbie head on like a fucking baby doll, or like an Aerodactyl head on like freaking Cabbage Patch Kid type of deal. You know, just like these were experimentations that he just does for amusement. So I guess real quick, because I don't think he'll be much of a long discussion, but I guess I'll start with Terrell. How do you feel about Sid's character in the movie, and do you feel like, you know, was it fine for what it was, or, you know, if there was to be improvement of his character, what would it have been?
Sid is a character who literally, I feel like movies nowadays are afraid to have. He is a villain
Really?
for the sake of being a villain. Like, people are so concerned about the backstory and the character development. And I'm like, you know, some people are just dicks. Like, I think one of the, like, give you an example. The Joker is like one of the most iconic comic book villains in the world. And he is a man who has no backstory. No confirmed backstory. There are a couple
Well,
references.
nowadays they are making one, but yeah.
The closest one we have is that Killing Joke one. And
Or
even
the
then,
movie, or his live action movie you just got.
yeah, but even then, at least in the Killing Joke version, in that storyline, he even says something along the lines of like, it's like maybe, like if he's gonna have a pass, he'd rather it be multiple choice. Pretty much meaning he makes his past never stays the same because he always makes shit up. Like he doesn't care. And Sid is back to that old school style of a villain who don't give a fuck because he's just, I think all of us knew a kid like Sid, or we did some of the shit that Sid did, which is break our toys in ridiculous ways. Because and he's around the age, it makes sense. When you're like a preteen to a teenager, at least for guys, blowing up shit was like it. If we could like get rockets or fireworks and shit, that's what we do. Sid is a pretty basic, it's hard to even call him a villain. He's just he's a kid. He's a dickhead. Like, that's what you do. It's not like he's out here punching children or nothing. He fucking blew up some toys. In the grand scheme of things, not a big deal. But for a movie about toys, he's the perfect kind of villain for it. So once again, like, I don't really have any issues with Sid because I don't need the character development for Sid because we did it. I can't even tell you why I would have done some shit like that as a child. Like, I was bored and I had fireworks. Fuck it. That's literally what it is. It's not like I wanted Woody to walk up to me like, why are you doing this? Why? What did toys ever do to you? Nothing.
Well, he sort of does that, but in a more twisted way, and more so like to really put a scare in them. But pretty good. But no, yeah, pretty good answer, because like I never because obviously for me, before we get to Tyrone, is that I feel like I'm in the same boat as you, in the sense that I feel like we didn't really need or I mean we didn't get it anyways, but I don't think we would have needed like a backstory explanation on why he's the way he is, because there are some characters where they just don't really need that type of, I guess, introduction, because some characters are, you know, I don't think it's a true testament if they're like good or bad, but just some characters just don't need it. Some characters just don't need explanations as to why they are the way they are. But no, Tyrone, same question to you. How do you feel like Sid was how Sid Phillips was to you in the movie, and if you had like, I guess maybe an improvement, probably not, but if there was, how could they have, I guess, done him better?
Earlier, you asked me, or you asked both of us actually, how we feel about the first movie. And for the most part, the first movie is a pretty solid premise.
Mm-hmm.
But as I've gotten older, the one thing that actually does come to mind when it comes to like a problem or a dent in Toy Story 1's armor actually is Sid. Because the more I look at Sid, the less I feel of him as a villain. Because like Terrell kind of said, not really much of a villain. He's just a kid. I mean, if anything, the way his toys are, where they're basically conjoined versions of other toys, this is what bugs me about Sid being an antagonist. Sid weirdly has a very creative and imaginative mind for his age. What's viewed as twisted in a different perspective would be viewed as pretty ingenious. Like when he does that thing where he's about to launch Buzz out from the rocket, where he does the thing where he holds the walkie-talkie and he's like, testing 1, 2, all systems are go. He's doing the thing that most people would do when it's an impressionable thing. He's doing the thing that most people would do before a rocket launch. That is a real thing. But he's imagining it. His imagination just is outletted in a way that differs from Andy's. Andy's is an imagination in which the toys themselves are basically role playing, whereas Sid is basically a destructive mind, but it's going into an imaginative outlet. I mean, how bad is that really, technically? The toys obviously think this is bad because their lives are at stake. But the only reason that's the case is because in this particular narrative, toys are sentient. So this is the only time in which, ironically, the imagination of a child is the detriment, which in any situation, including this one, it's promoted. Toys like to be played with. They've done several times, not just in this movie, but in the 3 movies that come after, where getting played with by a child is like the best thing that can happen to a toy. So it's kind of ironic how that creative outlet is promoted while Sid's is demoted, but it's only because the toys actually are alive. If they weren't alive, no one would give a shit. It's such a weird premise. And the more I think about it, the less Sid becomes an antagonist to me. But at the same time, like Terrell said, he's a bad guy for the sake of a bad guy. And Sid in this movie, to me, doesn't even feel like a villain. He feels like a force of nature. Because he almost feels like an ends to a means. This is where the toys die, right here. Is if they can't complete the task of getting back to Andy, they will die by Sid's hands. But that's only the case because Sid's whole premise is that he's creative, just in a destructive manner.
Tyrone, I've learned your secret.
What?
You've grown to like Sid because you relate to him.
Not even just that. Like, think about it. You even said it yourself. You did it. Like,
that's why it's hard to look at Sid and like, I don't think the point is that we just need. It's hard to even call him a villain. He's
like I said, he's a force of nature.
Yeah, he's antagonistic because he's dealing with toys. That's it. Like that's, yeah, and then because the movie is about toys. Like if this was a movie about like his sister. I mean, he bullies his sister to a degree, but I mean that's just an older brother thing. We just can't be trusted.
Right.
Like,
and then the movie would be like her toys. Her toys probably talk to her and give her ways to fight back or some shit.
Yeah, there's a lot. And I just
thought of that off jump. Yeah,
there's a lot of shit you can do with that premise. I'm just saying, I can understand you're lagging, not wanting to really refer to him as a villain because he is literally just a child.
Well, I've gotten older, that's why I said as I've gotten older, he's becoming less and less of a villain to me because. In retrospect, he's just, like you said before, he's just doing what a kid in his situation would do.
Listen, so your beard got thicker and your mind got quicker. I see.
Yeah, and I'm just saying,
Jesus, man.
Now, does that completely shatter the movie? Absolutely not. Like, the toys, if we're looking at it from the toys' perspective, then they need to get past Sid in order to get to Andy. And toys, in this narrative, at least in this universe, can make the choice of, what they want. They can choose their fate, and they choose to be with Andy. Think about it for a second. If Sid's toys truly hated them, they would be gone. They would leave. They would easily just be considered lost toys, which we'll get into much, much later. But, so in this retrospective, why these toys don't exactly agree with what has happened with them, they have taken, like, the traits that Sid has forced upon them and used them to their advantage. I mean, hell, Woody tacticalizes a plan using all of their special features, but they only have those special features because Sid made them, technically. I mean, he didn't make the toy, but he, took them apart and fused them together with different toys.
Right, of course.
So, yeah, I don't know. Sid's always been that weird conundrum ball that exists in this movie for me. And even his premise comes off as like Buzz questions it, and then everybody gives him a quick exposition of who Sid is, and then it's immediately dropped and doesn't become a focus until they get to Pizza Planet. He's like, Buzz is like, who's that? Oh, that's Sid. He tortures toys. Anyway, they go right back to it, and Sid's only a conflict because if there were no Sid, the movie would be over in about 45 minutes.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. But no, yeah,
So,
I mean,
yeah,
I agree with the premise about Sid.
On him. And as far as making him better, I mean, there's no real way you can make him better or worse. He's in that neutral state where, like I said, to me, since he's a force of nature, it's very hard to like really change him as a whole. Like if you were to change him, you would have to change literally the context of the movie, which is hard to do. So I can't think of any improvements.
Right. And that's fine. Yeah. But no, yeah, overall, I think we hit on the first movie pretty well on pretty much the major aspects of it. I mean, we talked about the character development, what they could have done better, and that premise, and just like how we felt about like the growth and what really made it special in some aspects. So I guess before we move on to the second movie, do you guys have any final thoughts about the first movie, or are we good to go?
I think we're good. Well, I'm good. Sorry.
I like the movie a lot. All right,
yeah, it's a good wholesome movie. Like I believe even kids to this day would pretty much grow to appreciate it. It's nice. It's fun.
Right. I think it's definitely one of those movies where you can show your little cousins, and I'm sure they'll appreciate it. Oh, and for those of you wondering, we'll save the ratings and shit until the end. We just want to get through the movies first. Anyways, with that being said, let's move on to Toy Story 2, which I believe, if I remember correctly, came out 4 years afterwards, and I believe 1999. I think the same month as well, in November. Although I could be wrong. Although I think I'm confident. Okay, yeah. So there we go. 4 years after the fact. All right. So yeah, basically the premise of Toy Story 2 is, obviously takes place after Toy Story 1. Duh. Over at the new house that they moved into at the end of the first movie. And basically Woody's going to cowboy camp. He's been looking forward to it. And obviously, of course, I forgot to mention the fucking video game, Buzz Lightyear video game intro, which, by the way, I thought is actually one of my favorite cinematic things that I've ever seen. Not just because it's Disney and Pixar, but it's more so like, I just like the presentation. But we'll talk about that later. But no, yeah, basically the premise is he's looking forward to cowboy camp. Andy has a playtime with him, ends up breaking him, his arm, and unfortunately, he cannot bring him to cowboy camp because of the fact that he's fucked up, and he has this little bit of a traumatic dream where he feels like Andy's just gonna get rid of him just because of the fact that he's broken. Then yard sale happens. One of the toys is there. Woody's just like, all right, well, I gotta go save him. He gets Buster, gets him out, but unfortunately he does not make the ride and ends up getting captured or kidnapped, whatever, by Mr. Al. I forgot his last name, but we'll just call him Al. Who is a owner of Al's Toy Barn, which is your typical toy store, but just in a barn. And as we found out, Woody is actually part of a toy collection of the gang Woody's Roundup, which consists of him, Jesse, which is the female counterpart to him. We got Bullseye and Stinky Pete, aka Prospector, whatever you want to call him. And he starts to realize of where he came from and what his, I guess, actual worth is. Although I don't think he ever really questioned it at that point. And obviously, the other toys back in Andy's house are going to go save him because, like, we got to get Woody back. And they went through this journey of going through the neighborhood, going through traffic, literally causing the fucking traffic jam. And they get to him, but Woody just has, like, the second thoughts because he's starting to understand, like, maybe a future of Andy is just not going to happen. I should probably just not go through with it. So there's, like, a lot of confliction of his true goal, which obviously, as we all know, Woody, he's someone very loyal. So in this movie, it just feels very conflicted. So they go through all of that. He decides to go with them. But however, second thoughts came in, and he's like, fuck it. I decided to go back with them. And this is where we find out the true evil nature. Well, not really evil, but like the true, I guess, anti-nagonist, whatever the proper term is, of Stinky Pete, which we found out he was the one that did a few things that ended up fucking up the experience with Woody. And they're going to Japan because that's where the collection's being sold if it had Woody. So they go through all that to get him back, which evolved the Pizza Planet truck, the airport, and literally on the plane itself. They managed to get him back, and he was fixed by Andy, presumably off screen, and then the end. Now, of course, a little bit of a better premise this time around, but I guess I'll hand it off to Terrell this time around. So I guess my first question would be, we talked about how like the first movie just aged pretty well, and if I remember correctly, I think we all kind of agreed that the second movie was pretty much our favorites. So this might be a little bit, not necessarily maybe a harder question, but more so of like, maybe because of the case of biases, I'm not sure. But basically, same first question like last time. Do you feel like this movie aged well? And if not, what are some of the things that it didn't really age well in?
You said me or Tyrone?
You.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my bad. I could have made that more clear. But yeah, to you first, and then Tyrone.
No. Yeah, I got you. I'm conflicted with the second movie because for the longest time, the second movie was my favorite film, and then we started rewatching them, and I low-key now I flip between this film and the third film. It's hard. It's so fucking hard, and it's primarily because the third film's second act is so fucking good.
Don't worry. We'll get to that.
But I like this film a lot. Like I said, I think the first three films are perfect. I can't even. And it's weird because the second film's premise is really fucking basic and doesn't even really, and it's in the main focus of it is Woody. It's not even Buzz. But the second film does something that I think the fucking fourth film can't even get right, which was using every character you had on the squad effectively. That like Woody's whole thing is being kidnapped and dealing and finding out about himself. Is ironically enough, it's the opposite of Buzz. Buzz knew all his lore and understanding from the beginning. Woody didn't know that he was a TV show or he was a phenomenon, which makes me wonder how long was Woody sitting in a box before he was picked up by Andy? Because even by like, if let's say we're going by Andy's age in the context of real life is the same as like Toy Story life, meaning it was around the 90s when Andy was the age he is in the first film. Woody's toy would have been extremely old. Cowboys wasn't insanely popular in the 90s. So, like, how long was he in a box before Andy, or maybe Andy's father, or whatever the fuck, found him? But yeah, Woody's are learning about himself while Buzz is chasing after him because of what Woody did for him in the first film. Their connection in the first film leads perfectly into this one. He even ends up quoting Woody a couple times in the film. And it poses the question of what's better, to be immortalized as a collector's item and never touched again, or to get out and be touched and played with and run the risk of being just ripped up or destroyed. And and to me it's the argument of immortality versus death. You'll have a finite time with Andy because eventually he'll get older and grow up and he won't need you anymore. Or you can be immortalized, live forever as a collector's item. And I like that dynamic because it's a dynamic that works on both wavelengths. It makes sense for the context of the movie, and as a human being, it's an immortality or a limited lifespan. It's such a good fucking parallel, and I love it. I absolutely love it. And with our villain of the film, which we don't even find out who's a villain until like the last 30 minutes, I want to say.
I mean, we know the villain. Yeah. The villain's just not enough of a. Oh, you mean the? Okay, well, obviously
I mean the true villain.
Yeah, we have two villains in this movie.
It's hard to call him a villain. He's more of an antagonist.
He's another force of nature.
But by the way, Terrell, just so people don't get confused. I assume when you mean by him, I'm assuming you're referring to fucking Al or Stinky Pete.
Stinky Pete.
Oh, okay.
Pete is the one I'm referring to.
Oh, okay, making sure.
He's essentially, I think Tyrone mentioned it earlier, he's like an alternate version of Woody in the sense that like he stayed in his box. nobody gave a fuck about him because one, he's a side character, and two, nobody just played with him during his time period, so he became a collector's item off rip. It's pretty much going into the life of a box collector's toy and how they never got played with. Like, and it trips me out because the premise is literally just go save Woody. That's the whole premise. And they managed to put in all these little things and references and correlations that's perfect. We also finally start getting introductions to toys that you would recognize, like Barbies, which I thought was kind of funny. I don't know who
They did that because Barbie was originally supposed to be in the first movie, but they didn't.
They didn't know where to put her.
Who owns Barbie? Mattel.
I don't
Mattel.
know.
I would assume so.
Okay, Mattel said no, but then who owns the potato head?
Play School.
Play School got like a crap ton of money because people kept buying potato heads after Toy Story 1. So Mattel finally broke and said, "Fuck it, we'll put Barbie in Toy Story 2."
You know, not to interrupt you real quick. But it's funny. It's funny because, like, to go back to the first movie real quick, is that there's a scene where obviously they're introducing themselves to Buzz, and literally you got the fucking toys saying, "Hey, I'm from Play School," and the other ones are like, "I'm from this company." So I just thought it was kind of funny, and that's how I kind of like remember, because they went through that effort just to put it there. But I just thought I'd mention that. But anyways, continue.
Yeah, I don't have any problems with the fucking film. I think it aged great. It's still good. It's still fucking good. The only thing if anything, the only thing that's, in my opinion, of the third movie is slowly improved over time. Not like the first film to begin with, but yeah, the second film, I think it's fucking great. Immaculate. But Tyrone takes stuff now.
Oh yeah, but no, yeah, Tyrone, what do you think about it? Same question to you.
This is my favorite of the three. There is no, like, I mean, the third one is powerful as hell, but this is my favorite for most of the reasons that Terrell pointed out. And even he didn't even touch on, obviously, the one character that I'm sure you were probably gonna have us talk about, but I'll just go into her now as a smooth transition. Jessie. So Jessie's the idea of what happens. She's basically an I already been through Woody situation already. Because she's traumatized. Like Terrell pointed out all of the ones, and obviously I'm sure he had this one in mind, but they did, like, there's so much from getting Woody back through Woody's perspective and the toy's perspective. And Jessie's story to me is like the thing that sticks out the most in Toy Story 2 is what happens when you've lived the life of a toy who was played with by a child that eventually does outgrow you. She's been through it already. She's traumatized from being put in a box for so long, where Stinky Pete is basically the way to reassure her because he's been in a box already. He is in a box currently. Well, as in the course of the movie, obviously.
Well, let's just say for most of it, but yeah. You get your point.
His original idea of his character is that he's in the box the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because he's a do not remove from box toy at this point. He's worth more as a collector's item than he is a toy because, like, nobody's played with him. Mm-hmm. Jessie had that lifestyle with Emily. She was Emily's favorite, and Jessie didn't get replaced by another toy. She just got replaced by Emily's lifestyle, which, in her idea, pretty much meant defeat. So Stinky Pete could have easily told Woody that once Andy grows up, you'll be left behind. But I'm glad that Jessie's here because it gives Woody both perspectives. Immortalization while being in a box and being on display from Stinky Pete's perspective, or being thrown away like Jessie was. Woody gets both sides of the story, and thus it helps alter his decision and lean to it, and they double down on it when Woody finds out that he is merchandise. He has a brand. He's a franchise mascot. Now, obviously, that would obviously have people say, "Oh, Tyrone, that's a contradiction. You said that, he didn't have much of a backstory." Back then, Woody, even though Woody had a backstory with the Woody's Roundup show and the yo-yo and the other merchandise based off of him, he was still essentially a cowboy, which a cowboy is the most basic premise. It's a cowboy. Like, it's not very intricate in terms of a backstory. He's just a cowboy that happens to have a name, Woody. Whereas Buzz has a whole marketing scheme going for him that pushes children towards the direction. You can clearly tell which toy is more imaginative between the two. So, with that being said, I like the idea that the movie plays with all of these elements. And I love that Buzz's gimmick is that he has to deal with another Buzz. But this time, this Buzz hasn't broken because it shows us it's a physical look at how his character's grown from the Buzz he was in movie 1. Because this is what that is. It's the Buzz in movie 1. The funny part is that the Buzz in movie 2, the second Buzz, his gimmicks always weirdly wind up working. It's a lot like when Buzz in first movie said he can fly, and it's a convoluted jumping with style situation that gives off the illusion he's flying. Whereas this Buzz, he's going through all of his gimmicks and motions, and they're all ironically working, which I think is funny. And like Terrell said, and this was a big point too, the toys I feel here are way more active. It's not just Woody and Buzz's adventure to come back home. You see Mr. Potato Head, Ham, Rex, Slinky, all of them are playing a pretty detriment role in, getting Woody back. So you get to see more flexibility with certain characters, where in the first movie, if I also had to rate the first movie on another problem, a lot of the toys' roles in the first movie was just miscommunication. Woody tried to kill Buzz. He's evil. Let's all round up together and try to fucking hang him. I think that's one of the threats they have in the movie. Whereas here, they're a lot more active. They're playing a bigger role. They work more as a unit and a team. Each of them have their own inputs and outputs on how they should handle a situation. And they're more individual characters now rather than just going on with the group. This movie does so much for pretty much every character, new and old, that's introduced here, and the premise behind them all is really great. I love the flexibility that they have using these characters, and this movie is just good. I like this movie is immortalized as one of my favorites.
Oh no, definitely for sure. Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as Terrell, sorta. Because 2 and 3 are really fucking good in their own aspects and just like how they connected to me. Although, if there's one thing that 2 has over 3, and it's not, I don't think it has to do anything with the movies themselves. It's just more so on me, because obviously I watch a lot more of 2 than 3. Not to suggest that 3 is bad or anything, but it's more so of like, because my family watches the shit out of fucking 2. Like, if 2 is ever on and we're all together, we would just watch it, because that was the movie that, ironically, this is the movie that actually got me aware of the Toy Story franchise, because I didn't immediately watch the first one, because the first one came out around the time where I wasn't even alive. The second one was like the first
I was 3 when the first one came out, so I know you were probably like very
I was up in the closet chilling, but no.
You weren't even perceived.
Nope, not at all. But no, the second one was literally my first movie, not just because it's the first one I watched, but it was the first one that was just existed when I was alive. And then the third one obviously came in later. But obviously there was a lot of time between 2 and 3 for me to catch up with the first one. But no, back to 2. So yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm like very conflicted. It's just that 2 has a bit more of a sentimental value to me, because obviously I watched it a lot more. Again, not to suggest that 3 is bad. It just so happens that I just happen to watch 2 a lot. So when you watch something a lot, you really appreciate of what it brought to the table. And I think Toy Story 2 is kind of hard for me to point out a mistake or something that they could have really done better. Now, obviously, of course, we're not talking about just the certain animation errors that they've done, because obviously that fucking happens. It's an early CGI film. But with that aside, I just don't know what to really point out as far as the errors. It's not because of the biasness. I just legitimately don't know. Maybe they could have done better in certain character fronts, maybe. But other than that, I just don't think there's that much errors I could point out about it. So if there's one thing I really do appreciate about the second movie, and I know we already talked about it to a good degree, I fucking love the connectivity, or whatever word that you guys prefer. The connectivity from the first movie to the second movie. Especially the fucking scene of Woody and Buzz in the room, and essentially their roles in the first movie are there but swapped. Woody's the one that's just, I guess, lost in that sense, and Buzz is the one trying to instill the, hey, you're this type of deal. I really appreciate that, because that just tells you of how far these characters have come. Where it's just like, not too long ago, I guess, they were in the opposite on the opposite spectrum. Like, Buzz was the one in identity crisis and just, going through all that, and Woody's the one trying to get him up to speed with, like, saying, hey, you're not a toy. I mean, you are a toy. You're not real Buzz Lightyear. So that's just something I really appreciate. I think it's one of the best scenes of the franchise. I think, personally, just because of like the connectivity and how they transpired the characters. So I guess the next thing I'll ask about is just because one of you guys brought up the fact that the other toys were actually useful, because I really enjoyed that part of it.
Can I say one thing too?
No, sure, go for it.
So actually, one of the things that I also find, and this was me watching it the second time and really absorbing all of this, the situation that Jesse was put in, the solution that Woody comes up with is actually a solution that winds up becoming a solution later on in movie 3. And I like the idea that this is like the test run for that. But you'll see what I mean later when I talk about it in the next one. But
yeah, of course.
Go ahead and move on to the next topic, Richie. Sorry.
No, you're good. But no, the one thing I'll say real quick before we get to the next thing is that I always appreciate movies that have, like, obviously your obvious main characters, and then you got like the background cameo characters, whatever. But I really like it when those characters are actually useful. Like, this is why I also appreciate movie 2, because they actually put in a good amount of effort to make sure the other characters, not just the ones that we're always focused on, which is, Woody, Buzz, Jesse, and I guess Stinky Pete to some degree, but you just gotta love it where, like, the background characters are actually helping out in like the main thing to do, which is to save Woody. Like, they're not just there for show, they're actually helping. Like, for example, the traffic going across the road scene, they were important in that, because they were trying to get from one side to another, and if it wasn't for a few of them, they probably would have not made it, especially Potato Head. He would have been crushed. But they helped out with opening up the toy store. They helped out with navigating around just to see where to go and who to go to. Like, you gotta love the character involvement. It feels like to me that they really did care about, like, their involvement and how they mattered in the whole thing, and especially the fucking Pizza Planet truck scene. The chase scene from essentially the hotel to the airport, where you got fucking, I think it was Mr. Potato Head on the shift, and then you got Buzz riding the not riding, he's the one navigating with the steering wheel, and then you got Ham, I think, was the one that was giving out the directions. Like, most of these toys were actually helping, and they weren't just there for shits and giggles. They actually meant something. So that's something that's just something I really appreciated. So I guess the second question I'll ask, and a couple more before we move on to the third one, is, I know we talked about it a good amount already, but I figured to bring this around again. How did you like the characters this time around? Because I know for the first one we talked about, like, they were at a pretty decent spot, but because obviously it's been 4 years since the first movie up until 1999. How did you guys we'll start with Tyrone on this one. How do you feel about Woody and Buzz this time around in the second movie compared to your thoughts of them from the first movie? Did you feel like something really changed, or or nothing really changed and they were just as good as they were in the first one? And
Terrell already tackled this a little bit, so I'm just gonna slightly piggyback off him.
Oh no, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead.
The parallel and dynamic that they used in this one for between those two characters in particular was really good, just because the roles technically wind up in reverse, but a different context, where Woody is learning his origin and backstory, where Buzz was already kind of equipped with his. So it's good to see that the message still works, no matter what the perspective is. it's just used very effectively here because it ultimately helps Woody make his decision to come back home to Andy rather than be a child collectible.
Right, definitely for
So
sure.
that's all I'm going to say on that one.
Right. Actually, in that case for Terrell, because I know Tyrone, you talked about the stuff with Jesse and going through that stuff with Emily from being like, you know, the thing that was her main interest to just being thrown onto the side. So I guess for Terrell, just to be different, how do you feel about that? Like, how do you feel about like, I guess Woody getting both perspectives of a lost toy and compared to the one that's in the box, aka Stinky Pete. So how do you feel about like how do you feel about like Jesse as a character and in the parallel that Tyrone was talking about earlier with you know, from the perspective of both, you know, Jesse a lost toy again and also Stinky Pete or Prospector as like box toy that doesn't really go outside as much because no one gives a shit about him.
I mean, I like Jesse a lot. I look at Jesse as kind of like Woody's little sister in a lot of ways, and I think that's the way they're portrayed. The one thing I mentioned before is that like Woody kind of gains this very like dutiful and loyal attitude throughout the films. He actually becomes more loyal as the films go on. This film has a good chunk of moments with it. A lot of them being in the form of with Jesse, and I think it's really cool. Now, obviously, you're going through and it kind of goes. It touches the whole like Jesse being the abandoned toy versus Stinky Pete, the prospector, being the forgotten toy. And they're both traumatized. It's just that Stinky Pete is just jaded as fuck and has no interest in children because he was never played with. In a lot of ways, you could argue that a lot of his struggles come from the fact that he never got to experience joy. So he doesn't miss a time where toys were played with because he was never played with. Like he's just a jaded old toy. Jessie's just traumatized. That was her first child, and she didn't know how to handle the transition. Which, to be fair, as a toy, there is no smooth transition. Um, and I like the fact that she maintains the fear of it throughout the film, which is why she has that whole. And they foreshadow it well by saying she don't want to go back in the dark. Like she's so traumatized with being alone, it scares the shit out of her. And Prospector taking advantage of that fear kind of manipulated her to do so. I also find it funny that the solution that Andy has a younger sister isn't brought up until like towards the very end of the film. Like even when they're talking about like them coming home to Andy's, they mention, oh, Andy has a little sister, but they mention it so like at the end of the conversation, so like almost like well, that wasn't really the point, but by the way, that's a benefit for you. And it's like, which it's funny because Jesse still ends up being more of Andy's toy than fucking his
Molly.
sisters.
Her sister's name is Molly. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like
I think it mostly comes down to the fact that Andy uses Jesse as like a backup, like basically a backup for Woody.
well, because she technically, since they're from the same series and like they look the same.
Yeah, so thematically they're both. Yeah, thematically they fit.
Yeah, but like as far as me, how I feel about the dynamic, like I like it. I like it a lot. He's jaded because he never got played with. He was always forgotten. So of course he'd rather be immortalized than fucking play with a child because he doesn't see the value in it. And because children didn't want to play with him. Jesse got to experience that joy, but can't stand what comes after. The fear of what comes at the end of the road is what it's essentially she saw death. She stared death in the face and blinked and said, I love life, but I'm afraid of death. So she picked being immortal out of fear. He picked it out of jadedness. It's a cool dynamic that led to the same conclusion. So I like it. But we also might want to be a little bit quick about how we approach these last two films, especially since I know the fourth film is going to have the most convo about it.
Oh, yeah. That's why, you know, gotta get this out of the way. So in that case,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, of course. But no, I guess just to end off the second movie, you know, do you guys have like any final thoughts on like anything, like as far as like the characters, fuck, even the music, any pop points that maybe you did mention before that you wanted to mention now?
Yeah, two things, and I'll let Tyrone take over.
Sure.
One, film's perfect. Love the fucking film. Second thing, I guess the one thing that didn't really get touched upon is probably the secondary buzz I find it hilarious that like he ends up having like a Star Wars-esque ending where he's like, "I am your father." No, I'm gonna play catch with my dad. I love that whole. I love that whole line of, "I'm a space commander like you. I get to fight Zurg because they're Zurg toys." And oh shit, he's my father's Star Wars reference. And then on top of that, well, me and my dad are gonna be cool. We're not gonna do some weird shit. Like, it's also funny because Buzz lost his arm in the first film, so I don't think it's intentional. I think it's a cool like little thing in the long run. But other than that, that's the only thing that didn't get mentioned. Oh, and we have Mrs. Potato Head. That's the other thing. That's new.
Yeah.
That was the other thing. We got new toys just in the room in general. So I thought that was.
I mean, it was hinted a few times in the first movie, but she finally came around.
But like I like the fact that like it's full circle. That's the one thing about the Toy Story films that always deserves praise. The level, and it was something we all three noticed through the first couple of films. The amount of foreshadowing that's in the other films is stupid, absolutely ridiculous. Especially the first film that had no reason to be that fucking what's the word I'm looking for? Forward thinking. Holy shit. So yeah, I fucking love film. Tyrone, have at it.
Actually, he did say he would BRB real quick. But I mean, I'll probably ask him later on when he comes around, just as like a little quick attachment. So we'll get back to him as far as like that's concerned. But no, yes, that's the end of the second movie. Let's go on to the third one, and we're gonna try our best to kind of go quick with this one because obviously the fourth one is just really what's the word I'm thinking of? Not contagious, but like really contentious. There we go. Where it's just like, nah. I mean, we all agree on it, but like I feel like there's just probably gonna be a bit of a clash of opinion, a tiny bit. But anyways, so yes, the first movie that came out in June 2010. So literally, it came out like I think around 10 or so years later after the second one, which means that there's a lot of time between both movies. And obviously, the premise for those of you wondering, basically, Andy's grown up. Like he literally is about to leave for college at any time now. And the toys realize that this is kind of like the end of their time with him. Although Woody is rather very optimistic about the fact that, hey, just because he leaves doesn't mean we have to. Like, because he wanted to go out to the attic and stuff. But unfortunately, a mix-up happens to where Andy's mom thought they were trash because they were in the garbage bag. So they get thrown out, but then they find a way, as per usual, to a safe spot. And that's when they found out about the idea. Well, not what they found out, but basically, earlier in the movie, they talked about like the idea of a daycare. They were interested by it, and they just so happened to be on their way to it. And then they get to the daycare. It looks really good at first for them, but then they start to realize that it's not as I forgot the actual term, but basically it's like a false belief where it's like they believe that, hey, this could be really good for us instead of just being the addict. But then they quickly realized that, hey, maybe this isn't really it. And then Buzz is like, all right, well, let me go figure out what's going on. And obviously Woody leaves because he knows that this isn't really for him, and he feels like it's not for everyone. But everyone is just so fixated on the fact that this is a better future for them, which unfortunately for them, it really isn't. So he leaves, runs into Bonnie. Buzz gets reset, as we talked about before, with the demo, and that happens for like a few minutes. And then they go for this journey of like getting out the daycare, and they figured out. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the pink. Strawberry smelled Lotso. He's the person that runs the place, but then we find out about his backstory, which I do understand and somewhat appreciate. But anyways, they go through the effort of like escaping he goes to Bonnie's house, leaves, comes back to get them, leaves with them, and then they go into the conflict with Lotso. He ends up being a dick because he does one of those things where we believe that the villain's going to help us out, but in reality he doesn't because he's doing it for his own advantage. Then we got one of the most the scene with the fire is just like, if there's one scene, one of the few scenes I could think about when it comes to Toy Story, whenever anyone mentions it, is that scene alone. I'm not sure why. It just so happens to be that scene alone. So basically, at the end of it, they get back to Andy's house, safe and sound. Andy leaves. but he notices, I guess, the little sticky note of the address to Bonnie's house, which is where he donates the toys. And when he gets to Woody, he's very reluctant on it because obviously that's his favorite toy. But as we all know, when you grow up, there's some things you have to let go. So he does that with Woody eventually. And yeah, that's pretty much the end of the movie. So, but no, yeah, I think I'll let Turo go first on this one. Then I'll go a little bit later. But I guess same question as always. From the time of which Toy Story 2 came out to the third movie, how do you feel? Or actually, from when the third movie came out, I should say, to now, how do you feel like the third movie aged? Do you feel like it aged pretty damn well, or once again, did it age well, but were there some things about it that could have maybe been done better? Like, what do you think about it?
So the third movie came out, I think you said 2010, right?
Yeah, June 2010.
Which is funny that I probably turned 19 during that.
I believe I was heading to the summer heading into my 8th grade year, so I think I was like 12 or 13 around that time.
I had just done maybe a year of college, or I was in my first year of college. So that movie thematically hit me very close to home because me and Andy were pretty much around the same age. I might have been a year older, but we were around the same age. And I think it was smart to have it where like time had majorly progressed. That film, initially when I watched that film, I was conflicted because because when I first watched it, I liked the second half of it more than the first half. And I've rewatched it a couple times, and I think I've grown to. It seems like more every time I watch it, the more I seem to enjoy. The third film for me, man, I can't even fucking express.
You just can't put it to words.
It hit so close to home, bro. Like he was like I said, Andy and me were around the same age. He might have been a year younger, but like, fuck, it was that reality of like even he, as an 18 or 17-year-old, was like, I'm not sure if I want to let go of my toys, and he fucking kept them. He kept them through his entire childhood, and when it boiled down to his favorite toy, Woody, that man was debating on bringing that motherfucker to college. That's a level. It to me, that movie shows a lot of Woody's loyalty to Andy.
Mm-hmm.
If Andy wants us in the attic, we're gonna stay in the attic. He was ride or die for that man. But you could tell Andy held him in the same regard. The fact that he debated on taking him with him to college, I was like, fuck. But the first half of the movie's cool because it's that whole here's an alternative. Why not be a toy in daycare where you're constantly surrounded by children? And ironically enough, it's not even a bad move, as we find out later, because I think Barbie ends up staying in the daycare.
Yeah, she stays with Ken.
Ken.
Yeah.
But like that is an option for you because hey, the daycare works. You just can't be like a fucking the little kids can't be trusted. That's another thing I thought was cool. That there was in the first movie kind of touches on it with Molly treating Woody kind of rough. In the few scenes that she's in.
Actually, no, she's pretty quite elegant. They have tea time. It's not crazy. I think the problem.
No. I'm talking about the first.
Molly, the baby. You're right, the baby. I'm thinking of Sid's sister.
Sorry. Yeah, you're thinking of Sid's sister. I know what you're talking about. But like it shows that the little kids don't know how to play with toys properly, which is an interesting concept that is really fucking obvious. But I find it interesting that that's like the reason why they don't want to hang. Because like it's fucking 2-year-olds. They don't know what they're doing because they're not old enough to go to school, but they're not like babies. They're not like in cribs. So it's like this cool dynamic of like it's a cool place to be, but like it's that well if you put in your time and put in your hours, you can get upgraded to the better room. And you're like, I mean that's a job.
Yeah, it sounds like a job. The fuck.
You've turned playtime into a job. And so now I got to deal with the bullshit to kind of get the opportunity to deal with the cool shit. I like Lotso as a villain a lot. That he's he's an abandoned toy who's like the prospector and is jaded as fuck because he was abandoned. He takes his aggression out on the baby and the clown that
He was replaced.
Yeah, like that was the running line. Like it's like no, it's like she left us. No, she forgot you. Then no, she replaced us. No, she replaced you. And that's what aided him. It wasn't even like all the other toys. And that's the difference between him and Woody. Woody gives a fuck about the whole. Lotso doesn't give a damn about none of that. Lotso's like, he's worrying about him. And if he can persuade you to his side, cool. But the fact that he's a sweet, that the premise of the toy is he's a bear who smells like strawberries, but really he's a jaded old man who doesn't like the fact that he was left by the one person he thought cared about him and didn't have enough faith in her to try to go back for it. Like he went back to the house, saw that she got another bear, and that was it. That was it for him. When there's nothing against the law saying she couldn't have owned 2 bears. So like, it's just a whole thing. Because he's like, the premise is that like a lot of the adults kind of changed some of the dynamics in the story. So like, it could have literally been a simple situation of, oh, her parents bought her another bear. Not that she necessarily wanted the other bear. They could have just bought it for her, so she chill the fuck out. And then the last section, the near death section and the passing of generations section is one of the most beautiful fucking things I've ever seen in my life.
Definitely.
And he played with them one last time, and they saw him off to college, and I was like,
you're like, fuck, man.
It's so fucking good. I'm gonna Tyro talk.
Actually, Go. Before we do that, Tyrone, since you're gone for a moment, I obviously at the end of Toy Story 2, I asked, if you had like any final thoughts on the movie. So I want to give you the opportunity to, air your final thoughts about it.
I said everything I need to say about the second one. The second one is my favorite, but moving on to the third one.
Go on ahead. It's all yours.
The third one is very powerful to me. Like 2 and 3, I say that I like 2 more than 3, but it's not by like a big margin. It's literally like by a point, and it's just because with 3 is just 3 obviously has this time gap in between 1 and 2, obviously, but unlike most movies that have that time gap where they make a new movie just because, nostalgia reasons or kids remember this one's canonical towards what's happening. Years have passed since Andy has grown up. Like, they use that time skip to their advantage because they know that if we can do this, we can have our audience grow with Andy. Andy, in a sense, is us in this situation and is used in a way to represent exactly what happened, the child that grew up. So when it's done this way, this formula, it hits 1,200 times harder when the bad things do happen to the toys. Because much like Andy, we have a connection to these characters. They're not just toys. They have evolved far past that and become pivotal characters towards our childhood that we've seen since movie 1. The premise of the villain, I think, is done really well because it deals with what happens when a toy is forgotten and then later replaced. And I like the premise and ideals of that. And I also like that Lotso doesn't break character at all. Like, there's never a moment where Lotso has to do like the transitional change and he's a good guy. No, he plays it off as a bad guy the whole time. And even that moment where he pretends to cooperate with the toys, he goes right back to his original character. That damage that's been done to Lotso is so hard that it stayed with him the entirety of the time that he's had to deal with, being, left behind. One of the things that I also like here is that because Woody's the one toy that Andy does have a special connection with, it does create this weird rift that Terrell stated where Woody has to care for the others. Because if he truly didn't care, he would have just been chilling at college with Andy and just called it a day. But they gave him a minute as a character to hang out with with the new life and give the possibility of, making another kid from the next generation happy. And that's the exact same thing that happened to Jessie. Jessie had to deal with kid transition. She already went through this. She already went through the whole hang out with one kid, then they grow up. And I believe in movie 3, they started up again where since Andy's getting older and he's going to college, Jessie starts breaking down. She's doing that because she's like, it's Emily all over again. Like, she's going through this twice. That's how powerful to me movie 2 was, is that it's able to carry over into movie 3's stuff, like seep into it, and it's a gradual shift. So I like the idea that 2 was gave the prototype for ultimately what Woody's ultimate answer for this dilemma would be. Let's just move on to another kid. It's hard to let go, but it's even harder to try and stick around. So I like that. And then the ending, obviously, where, they're about to meet their ultimate end. It's super powerful, especially if you watch the first 2 movies where they kind of hint at this fate. So yeah, I like movie 3 is powerful. It's good. Terrell, I can very much like see where Terrell's coming from when he says this is his favorite. 2 just has a better grip on me. That's all.
Oh no, definitely for sure. And I'm not sure if you were around for the part where I think he was wrapping up in the second movie, but the thing I liked that he mentioned was just how fucking forward thinking this franchise is. Well, the first of I guess 4, although I think he said first 3. I could be wrong, but
yeah.
But basically,
I mean, I think the first 2 have references to the next couple of movies,
mm-hmm.
and the shit just hit. I feel like 1 through 3 are pretty like connected world building wise.
Oh, it's super good.
And just references and shit. Like 4 is the only one that feels kind of disconnected, and I almost feel like that's kind of the point. But
yeah.
The first 3 are really connected. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, but we'll get to that for sure. But no, that's what I liked about it. I could watching this movie. If you watch the other 2 prior, I guess either on the same day or later on, or if you still have like a very good, fond memory of how the first 2 went or whatever, you can tell that everything was obviously connected one way or another. You can maybe sense one out from the first movie, but most of it I feel like was from the second movie, especially like the small little I'm not sure if it was hyperventilation, but basically that little bit of a breathing moment with Jesse when they were like kind of freaking out about the fact that Andy doesn't want us type of deal anymore. So the carryover is just fucking insane. But that also is a true testament as to how good the story is, because you can literally just instill these points in each of the movie and they're all fucking relevant. They're relevant to the plot, relevant to the character development, and just everything about it. Like it's just like really amazing of how like well connected they are, and not just the fact that they're well connected, but just the explanation and how significant they are, because you can really feel that it's still pretty fresh in their minds for the most part, especially Jesse, like I said, for that one moment. I guess the next question, which I'll ask to Terrell, is more so this kind of like the same one from last time, but just because like again, it's been like around 10 years since the second to the third movie, so wanted to ask again in regards of Woody and Buzz. So pretty much just that. How do you feel like those 3 kind of aged in terms of like from the gap of the second movie to the third movie, and how they were done in their own outright? Do you feel like they were done pretty well? And if there were any improvements that you feel like could have been done for those characters, what would they have been?
You're talking about just the cast in general, or?
I mean, you could talk about the others if you want, but I'm mainly putting this for Woody and Buzz because obviously it's kind of like not necessarily a high point, but more so of like, since it was like 10 years from the second to third movie, do you feel like the characters, those 2 specifically, but if you want to talk about the other ones, you can. How do you feel like they were done in that aspect? Do you feel like they were still pretty good, or do you feel like there was, I guess, a drop off? And regardless of such, what improvements do you think they could have done?
The only thing in 3, and it kind of gets into like the only real problem I have in 3 is the random Spanish mode nonsense. It felt like it's a funny quirk and at least a couple of good jokes, but I feel like that is the only weird, weak thing in 3 is that like Buzz is, I would argue, is just as competent as Woody. So what they end up doing is to make sure the plot progresses. Especially 4 does this. 4 actually I think handles it better to a degree. 4 just takes too long to get there, but like they sometimes have to put Buzz in different situations. 2 does it too. We're having we need to switch him out with the fake one. We always gotta like have Buzz somewhat nerfed in some way to like progress with the story, but not too quickly. Like I always feel, and it happens with Buzz like at least twice. In the third movie is only the Spanish mode, which only lasts for a little bit. It lasts, I think, it's not. It's like towards the latter end of the movie. It's probably like maybe 20 minutes, and it's almost the same thing for 2. But it always irked me as far as their relationship is concerned. I mean, they're still squad. I mean, obviously they're the most divided here. I want to say, because it kind of gets into the Buzz moving into Woody's position, like trying to be the responsible one. Like and he wants to worry about the whole group, whereas some would argue that Woody may be getting blinded by his loyalty to Andy specifically. So like they're still squad, and I mean, and they're in their whole relation, and as far as their dynamic, it's still as good as it's ever been. But you could argue this movie brings a level of division because Woody is 100% committed to Andy, whereas Buzz is more so committed to like the group and staying together and being a family. But I feel like they both understand each other points, where the group learns that Andy did give a fuck about him, and Woody understands that the attic it may not be the best place for them. They kind of learn from each other, but not directly. Like they never tell each other these things. It's more of them experiencing it for themselves. Like the way they find out is through Mrs. Potato Head's like hidden eye. That's how they find out that Andy meant to put him in the attic. And Woody kind of learns the value of like being with another child and playing again through his interactions with what's her name?
Bonnie.
Bonnie. Yeah, Bonnie. So like they come to learn each other's points without actually like having that, we need to have a conversation. They learn through experience, but some people just like it's that whole show don't tell thing. Don't tell me I'm wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Let me show me why I'm wrong. So it's their dynamic is as good as it's been, but obviously this movie they're more divided because of their difference in priorities. But they come to understand each other, and it's cool. I enjoy it.
And just to like go ahead and because I know you're probably going to ask me the same question, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you my point.
Go for it.
So, Woody and Buzz, I think I found the probably the glaring point as to why I prefer Toy Story 2 more than 3, and I think because here Buzz, while the Spanish gimmick, and then he's also in demo mode, which essentially puts him right back in the whole I'm Buzz Lightyear Star Command situation thing again. And Terrell brought it up. It feels like they nerf him every time. But at least in the second movie, when he's fighting with literally himself, Buzz is still as competent as he was at the end of movie 1. So he at least like he's taken a position of command. He's a leader, and he leads to the others. And he's even able to expose which Buzz is the real one and which one's the fake, just simply by closing stopping the mask that's on the fake Buzz, and he does the whole freak out, can't breathe thing. Like that Buzz already has the maturity level to be competent. Whereas in movie 3, you've essentially taken the original Buzz that we've all like already grown up with and has grown through the movies 1 and 2, and you had to revert him back to movie 1 mode in order to make him a threat. In order to pretty much make him a threat where another toy could have just wound up being that. Lotso had an entire jail cell of warden-based toys to do whatever he wants, and who's the main like obstacle they got to get past? Oh, it's just Buzz in his Toy Story 1 form. Like, I don't know, that bugs me. It just bugs me because it feels like we had to revert one of the characters back to their older self to create conflict that otherwise wouldn't have existed. I guess is how I'm looking at it. But in terms of their relationship, they do still understand each other, and they're both like very useful characters towards each other, and they help each other grow out, and thus, I do love Toy Story 3's handling of Buzz when he's humbled by the fact that he's not Andy's favorite. It's kind of weird though because Andy loved Buzz in movie 1, but I think just because of sentimental value, I guess Woody just sort of top prioritizes him. But he is at least humble enough to realize that if he's going to be an addict toy, he's going to be an addict toy. And he was, I think, the first the toy able to accept that if he's going to go to Bonnie because that makes the most logical sense.
Definitely for sure. Yeah. I guess for me real quick because obviously we do want to make forth with the time.
Yeah.
But no. For me, I feel like the third movie, as far as that's concerned, not much different. I would add. I think it just becomes more of a definement. In terms of like how the characters were done. I guess I feel like the involvement of some of the others, as we praised 2 for doing. Maybe it's I don't know if it's necessarily the same, but it definitely did try, like where they actually did put in they actually helped out with the thing at hand and the plot at hand, just to kind of like progress out of escape from the daycare through the garbage into the dumpster, into the whole potential fire death that they barely missed on. So I definitely like that for sure. But actually, I guess the next question is more so on Lotso, and I know that Terrell spoke highly of it and spoke for the most part about it. So I wanted to ask you, Tyrone, about it. How do you feel about Lotso's character, and just like, what do you like about him, and what did you not like about him, and if you had to like change the character, if you feel like he needed improvement, what would have that been?
I don't think he needs to really be changed. However, the problem is, I think one of the big problems with Lotso is that he carries Stinky Pete's like energy of jadedness, and they're both jaded for different reasons, so at least it is justifiable. But I think the one thing with Lotso is that I think coming off of movie, if you watch them back to back, it's very glaring. If you watch 2 and then 3, you very much get like, oh, the guy with the cane is very mad at things that happened, and they're related, and they have differences. They have enough differences to justify them being different characters, but like they do come off as the older character that was around prior to the existence of like everything that happened in Toy Story, being jaded about something, and carrying that jadedness over and influencing other toys. Stinky Pete influenced Jesse because it's like, hey, you were traumatized, but at least we can be collectibles and you won't have to worry about that anymore and be put in the box. Lotso's like, hey, I was abandoned once and I took this daycare and I've made it, and all the toys listen to me unless they wind up being, chewed out by preschoolers or something. I don't know. They both are cut from almost the same mold, so it's hard for me to really feel for Lotso as much as like at least Stinky Pete had the advantage of going first and being the first jaded old man toy, and his reasoning was because he wasn't played with. Lotso's reasoning was because he's replaced, which is a valid reason. I think the problem with Lotso is that like he's right after Stinky Pete, so it's like it's hard to really like digest it, and it's almost to a point where you could look at, like, if you looked at both movies back to back and you looked at movie 3, you could be like, he's probably the villain. Like, you look at him and go, yeah, that's probably the villain there right there. Lotso. It's him.
Yeah, no, sounds about right.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
But no, Terrell, do you happen to agree with his sentiment there? And regardless of whether you agree or not, do you have anything kind of like new to add to it, or just the same thing as you said before?
The problem is, so in the context of your first watch through of these 2 movies, between 2 to 3, I mean, there's been a gap of 10 years. So in a lot of ways, I don't get the same like, oh, it's the same character. It's only in
Well, that's why I
retrospect.
made the caveat. If you look at them back to back, I know they're,
Yeah.
they're different enough to be their own characters. So I will admit they're not carbon copies of each other.
Lotso is essentially just Lotso's just essentially Jesse if Jesse were to become jaded.
Yeah.
Where like she lost because Jesse was replaced. Jesse was just replaced with other things in Emily's life. That's what it was.
Yeah.
The other problem is that Lotso was a fucking asshole because regardless of if he was replaced or not, he would deny others happiness based off of his own jadedness. Because the baby and the clown weren't fucking replaced. But fuck it, she didn't love any of us. Oh! Like he still wanted to be I think that's what makes him different. Is that like he relished in his own self-loathing and wanted to drag others down with him. Like when the prospector did it, he needed them to get into the museum. Like he couldn't get in unless he had Woody, Jesse, and Bullseye. Whereas like Lonzo had no reason to hold the baby or to hold the clown or hold anyone else. But he's petty because he was forgotten because of the things that happened to him. He refused to let anyone else enjoy happiness. Hell, Ken mentions it towards the end of the third movie where he's like, Sunnyside could be a real groovy place if we were just better to each other. But Lotso likes to have that hierarchy. He essentially still wants to have the power and control. And I mean, in a lot of ways, he's a bad version of Woody from the first film.
Yep.
He's if Woody just kept that path. Because Lotso was obviously the favorite of the three of them. Of the three, him, the baby, and the clown. And he could not take it. He could not. He didn't have the whole space toy jadedness, but like, it's the same thing. So I'm not gonna go too much into it because we're running a little on time, and we literally have the most controversial movie to deal with.
Yeah. So in that case, any final thoughts on like the third movie that you wanted to mention now, or we just move on here?
I like it. I like the whole prison breakout stuff, and I like the movie a lot.
That's the prison breakout, yeah.
I mean, that's what that latter chunk of the movie is. Like, I flip between 2 and 3 now versus like just liking 2 the most. I still like 2. My love for 2 never went down. It's just that I've grown to enjoy 3 more.
Yeah.
Oh no, yeah, definitely. One quick comment before we do get to 4 is that you know, this may sound kind of like obvious when I say it, but because we were talking about like, oh, we love the second half a lot more compared to the first one. To me, I feel like the first one just kind of like, it's probably like the most basic analogy I could put, but it basically the first one is obviously a setup to where just like some pieces were put into place for it to be useful later, and I feel like the second half of the movie was just basically those pieces going into action. Well, a few of them kind of already went on ahead, but basically most of the other points just kind of started with the second half, and I think the way that they executed in the second half was just really incredible, which is why again a lot of people appreciate the second half, not just because of like the character points and the plot and whatever. It's just how they executed those things, like the character development in terms of moving on from Andy, Woody realizing that hey, as much as we love Andy, we want to stay with him, we can't really do that, so we got to move on to the next kid. So those are the sentimental things that is really appreciated, and it's very ingrained into the franchise. But that's just the one comment I want to make. So obviously, like you said, we're going on time, so we'll just go into the fourth one. And like I mentioned before, the fourth one, I feel like we're all in pretty much in agreement as far as like where we stand with it, which we'll talk about in a bit. But basically the premise of the fourth movie, which by the way, it came out in June 2019. Now, this was actually the Toy Story movie I actually went out of my way to watch in the theater, so I had that experience of doing so. But basically, the fourth movie takes place at Bonnie's place. They're having usual play day, but then you start to notice that Woody isn't really played with as much anymore, and that kind of gets to him slowly but surely. Then Bonnie starts like, what was that, kindergarten or something, like orientation. She's not really doing well, not really making any friends. Woody feels bad, so he's like, fuck, I gotta do something. So he gets like these random materials, which essentially makes Forky. Then orientation's over, the family goes on a trip over to the RV park, and also later on the the fucking festival or whatever, somewhat near the end. And I'm not gonna go too much in depth about the premise. All I'll say is that, but basically from the RV park to the antique store, and just everything around it, it was basically a lot of goal shifting points where like you would think that he would stick through certain ideals, but his perspective was broadened up a lot more. I would add. So basically, it's just that's what the fourth movie was. Just him opening his eyes to another opportunity that's just waiting for him that he never realized that he had, but because he was so loyal to like his kid, mostly Andy, or I guess somewhat Bonnie, but we'll talk about how that was poorly done. He never realized what opportunity he had. So I guess just to give you the premise, the whole movie is just basically him realizing that opportunity. So I'll start with Tyrone, because Tyrone, for those that might not know, has actually never seen the fourth movie until recently. And I wanted him to go first because he's the one that has a more fresh mind to it, while me and Terrell were the ones that kind of saw it ahead of time. So we already knew what to expect. So, Tyrone, so the first question I would ask is, I guess I can't really say the first question like the first three, because obviously they were all in different time periods. So for this one, I would ask you, what is your general feel for the movie? Like, how did you feel about it without like going too much into it?
I didn't watch this movie in theaters only because there was a weird part of me that was telling me not to. Like, I got closure with the third movie. The third movie did a really good job of giving me closure. So it was very hard for me to stop and think, oh, they made a fourth one? Like, my brain was constantly on this, like, why'd they make a fourth one? Like, the third one sort of ends the whole, like, Andy saga. And as an audience, I thought I was left to the idea that, like, the toys just belong to Bonnie now. And I saw that they were making short little specials before they made the fourth one, and I thought that was the route they were going to just go. I was like, oh, okay, well, then the idea here is that they'll probably do these little specials, and we'll just see tidbits of Buzz, Woody, and the others, but in the context of being in Bonnie's care. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. But then when I heard they're making a fourth movie, I'm just like, wait, hold up. So what more can they do here other than make the plot central towards Bonnie? And they kind of do that in a way, but then I obviously see they take some executive decisions that I don't really like, and sort of confirmed why I personally didn't want to watch this movie for so long. Like, there was a reason subconsciously that I just wasn't trying to watch this one, and when I finally saw it, I'm like, this is the reason.
Yeah, it's just you were very. I mean, obviously you were very adamant about not only that, but just kind of like the whole premise of it, just not really. I mean, obviously we can all agree that the movie was not necessary at all. Like, I don't think it's one of those things where like you could watch the first three and definitely not miss out on anything that four had to offer. And Terrell put it best when we talked about it prior to us watching the fourth movie, or hell, even during it. But he pretty much said that, you know, if you really give a fuck for Woody's character, you would probably just end up watching it, because this is literally what it was. This was the conclusion to that, basically. So to transition into that, Terrell, so since you and I were the ones that kind of watched it from the get-go, from when it came out, and since it's been like, I think almost a couple years since it's been out, since it came out in June. So
Around 2 years, yeah.
Oh yeah, almost like 2 years. But how do you feel for the movie? Now obviously we all agreed that, you know, it wasn't necessary, but that aside, how do you feel about it in terms of what it stood for, and, you know, what were some things you liked about it, and what were some things you didn't like about it?
Oh man. So the biggest problem that the fourth movie had is that it's busy. It's just so busy with a bunch of shit, and it never really gets to do everything right. Some things get more attention than others. My God, this movie's just a busy fucking piece of mess. But there are things I like about it. I like the Buzz inner voice thing. It's almost like Buzz's full Woody 2 transformation happens, where he kind of becomes that same level of honorable and loyal and family oriented um guy like Woody is. That shit is great. Um it happens kind of late in the film, but it does happen and it's great. I like Gabby as a villain. I like the idea of the whole she's a perfectly fine toy but is passed over because of one feature about her that fucking sucks. She's defective. Bringing up the whole the concept of the defective toy. But then you got Forky, who's the driving force for the film and whose character development pretty much gets thrown into a walking back to the RV section, and then the rest of the film's like Bo Peep. Oh well, Bo Peep. Well, Forky's there. Like it's so much, and then which is part of why I don't like the whole giving Jesse the badge thing, because I'm like, Jesse doesn't do anything in the fucking film to earn the badge. It's only correlating with the beginning of the film, because the beginning of the film, Bonnie took the badge and gave it to Jesse, but realistically, it needs to go to fucking Buzz. I hate it because I get pulled back and forth. Like at the end of the day, I think you were right, Richie. You don't need to fucking watch this film. You don't need it because it doesn't do it unless you just care about Woody. Because you don't care about Bo Peep. Bo Peep wasn't a character in the early films.
No, absolutely not.
But if you cared about Woody and wanted to see an epilogue for Woody, that's it. That's the only real purpose this movie serves, with some nice scenes, a decent villain. That's what irks me. There are things in this movie that are inherently good, but it's not worth the film existing. But I'm like conflicted about it. That's why I said, like, we're all in agreement. The film probably shouldn't have been made, and in a trilogy, it would have been a perfect trilogy.
Absolutely. Yeah, but absolutely.
I hate it because the fourth film has good things in it. That's what bums me out. Like, I like the fourth film to a degree, but God, I just wish they were in better film.
Oh no, yeah. Listen, I think we can, and obviously this is a no shit type of deal because we all know about this. We can say that, you know, this movie was not a necessity. Like it shouldn't have been made. While we can still at least appreciate, you know, some of the things it did bring. Although I feel like some of the things I do appreciate about the fourth movie aren't necessarily the plot points, if you may, because it's like I can appreciate at least some of the comedic aspects of it, which they did pretty damn well in, and of course the I don't think it's. I mean, I'm gonna call it a cameo appearance because obviously, you know, they weren't really they weren't consistent in appearances, but and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, if I get their names wrong, but you know, when you have what was it, Key and Peele in this as like those two stuffed animals, I thought that was pretty funny, but it didn't really do anything for me as far as like changing my opinion about the whole entire movie. I just thought, yeah, they were pretty funny in the movie, but does that change my overall opinion about everything else and just how I feel about the entire structure? No. So that's what I feel like about the fourth movie. It has some pretty good things about it, but those good things don't really change my whole stance about it at this point. Like at this point, Toy Story 4 is like the DLC to a game that doesn't need DLC. You can play it and enjoy it for yourself, and you can like it, but you can literally just play the main story of the game and not miss a damn thing if you don't play the DLC.
Well,
so,
my problem.
But go ahead, Tyrone.
My biggest problem with 4 was that if you watched 3, it feels like so much was put out of the way to make this plot happen. Bonnie doesn't care about Woody. Since when? Because, like, this doesn't take place long after 3, and the last time we saw Woody with Bonnie, Bonnie was already played with Woody before playing with the other toys. She already, like, found him at the daycare, took him, and had a whole session playing with Woody along with the other toys. And then afterwards, we wind up in this situation where Bonnie wants Woody and Andy has to hesitate. So knowing that that scene exists and then jumping into movie 4 going, Bonnie's just neglecting Woody, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit at all to me. It doesn't feel genuine. It feels very disingenuous to the character that we've already established, that being Bonnie. It's like they completely didn't read the script from movie 3 or something. It bugs me to high heaven because it's very disingenuous to what we just saw. And then it's just like, after that, she creates Forky, which is a plot point within itself. And like Terrell said, Forky was a plot point that was grazed over so quickly. Remember how I said Sid felt like a force of nature? This is how I am standing on the fact that Forky, to me, isn't even a character. He's a plot point. Not even a good one. Because the premise isn't even... Like, when I knew about Forky before I watched the movie because the trailers introduced him. And in my brain, I thought they were going to really, like, play with the idea of what makes a toy like a toy and what doesn't. Because Forky keeps saying he's trash. And in all intents and purposes, he is. He's a plastic spork mixed with a couple of pipe cleaners, clay, and and popsicle sticks. He is, of all accounts, he's a toy. I mean, of all accounts, I'm sorry, he's trash. He's literally just a made-up child's plaything, which I find ironic too, because Sid got ostracized for the exact same shit that Bonnie's doing currently. Taking apart a bunch of shit to put it together to make a new toy. This was wrong, like, what, 20 plus years ago? But now it's the pivotal plot point. So it weirds me out that such a beautiful premise of what makes a toy really a toy and the struggle between consciousness and humanity is mostly just played off as a whatever element, and then even joked about at the post-credit scene where Forky meets up with this knife or whatever, and she's like, how am I alive? And he's like, I don't know. Like, it just, that bugs me only because they had gold in their hand and they completely dropped it. And in favor of that, they put, well, Woody wants to be with his girlfriend again, right? Y'all remember his love interest from movies 1 and 2. Wasn't that fun? And I'm like, that's not powerful enough for me to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is the fork that's fucking sentient right now.
Oh no, yeah, definitely for sure.
And what makes it twice as bad is that now Woody has made the ultimate decision to leave Bonnie and be with Bo after only one movie, by the way, because he was under Bonnie's care for literally the end of movie 3, and now he's leaving already. You don't think Bonnie's gonna miss Woody? Oh, but apparently they had to make Bonnie neglectful towards Woody and not care about Woody this entire time simply because we need to justify him being with Bo. It just felt like to me, it was better when Bo was gone because it made Woody realize that you can lose anybody in this situation, even somebody close to you. And he had to carry that. And it was one of those things where it's like the character, that's a symbol of the sacrifices he's had to make as a toy and the things he's witnessed is seeing a fellow toy, especially when he cares about separated. Here, he doesn't learn any of that at all. He doesn't carry any of that at all. He hasn't grown better as a person because of it too. Because the minute they bring Bo back, it's like, oh yeah, I like Bo again. Oh yeah, Bo, I'll go out of my way. He doesn't even transition Bo back into the lifestyle of being with Bonnie. The idea could have been there where Bonnie's like afraid of the dark and Bo winds up doing her job as a lamp again. Because Bo's whole thing is, I live life as a free toy, as do whatever I want. which is great. But you see in the movie that Bo is like missing pieces and shit that she has to tape back together. Being a lost toy sounds nice in general, but it's tearing her apart. It would have been good if Woody had been the thing to bring her back down to that realization that, oh shit, I can't keep doing this forever.
Definitely,
But,
definitely. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Terrell. Like this is just it. I don't like
Yeah,
it.
yeah, Terrell. So
It's
same
all-
question to you.
It's a. What was the question? I felt I was about to go.
Same
home.
Yeah, it's the
Sorry,
same one, dude.
question
Same one.
was just overall feelings and what you
I
like.
mean, it's just.
Mm-hmm.
It's just hard, bro. It's hard, man.
Now, sorry,
like some
I'm
of the
gonna say this one quick thing. Because Terrell brought it up at one point, and I agree with him. I like Gabby as a villain from the start, but she's a whole nother problem that I'm sure Terrell will tackle.
I guess just to be a little bit more different, how do you feel, since someone touched it for a good part of it, how do you feel, Terrell, about Gabby as like a character?
Gabby. I like her.
I do too.
Premise of her character. I like a lot. I even like her pretty much in the beginning up until and the whole. Pretty much, I like her up until Woody just gives her the voice box. Now I'll give the movie credit. It did a lot of cool misdirection by like, oh, she gets the voice box. Oh, she makes herself known through the voice box. The girl that she's been eyeing finally comes and plays with her. And then then I think the grandma goes, "Do you want that toy?" And she's like, "Nah." That's a hard-hitting moment because it means that even if you look cool like that, your issue wasn't your voice box. She just didn't give a fuck about you like that. And I thought that was a hard lesson. But I felt like but considering Gabby is like the push for the final act of the film, oh, we got to get Gabby and bring her back with us. But instead of taking her to Bonnie, here's a random child that's crying.
I mean, it's funny.
Falling.
It's funny you mentioned that because that was the original plan. The original plan was to take her to Bonnie.
Well, you know why it was the original plan? Because they still needed to do the going back.
Actually, it's not even. It's not even just Gabby. Not to interrupt you. It's not even just Gabby. They even promised that to fucking the other two stuffed animals, which
Key and Peele, yeah.
Yeah, Key and Peele. They promised them. They promised them Bonnie. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's hard because they use the other characters as vehicles to get to the final sequence. It wasn't really about the characters because they all divvied up in different locations. The Bunny and Ducky didn't go. Gabby found her child on the way there. It was you know why we did all that? So Woody could have a heartfelt scene with the rest of the squad, and then the movie could end with him being like, I'm going back. And what trips me out is that his whole nature is still the same. So even in some of the post-credit stuff, he's like, let's help these toys get played with. So he's like helping them cheat at the game so that the kids win prizes and they get the toy and the toys get played with. And my brain's like, so what was the development then? Because you're like the same guy. It was Bo. And I'm like, Bo wasn't interesting to begin with, and Bo's character is that I'm a free woman and I'm independent, and that's it. That's her character, because she doesn't learn anything. She just falls in love with Woody all over again. That's really what it is.
Yeah, slowly but surely. But
I don't know, bro.
I know,
I like aspects of the film. I like some of the side characters, but god damn it.
If there's one thing I'll say real quick, because because time is a valuable thing.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned about the emotional ending and stuff. I mean, I guess it was to some aspect because I guess it was the shock of, oh, he's leaving the group type of deal. Like he's no longer part of it. Looking back to it, I feel like it's not really. I don't know. I just don't feel it anymore. Like when I look at that scene, I'm just like, oh, well, he left. Mainly because
the problem is you're coming from the third film where they almost died.
Well, not only
emotional thing with Andy. Like this shit, it can't touch it. It can't even top it because you had Andy leaving them in that goodbye scene. And they almost died in the same film.
Yep.
That level of powerfulness you can't get in the fourth film. There's nothing that will be a perfect storm that the third film had.
Absolutely.
So the fourth film, feels like an unnecessary epilogue.
The fourth ending real quick before Tyrone hands it off here. It just feels rushed. Like I mentioned to you guys before in private, but the one that really got me as far as like as to why I feel that way. I look at Woody and the moment of Woody and Buzz. Now, of course, there are certain goodbye scenes that are impactful when they're kind of quick, but I don't really feel that with Toy Story 4, mainly because of, I guess, when we came off of Toy Story 3, as we all thought that maybe that was the definitive, but the fourth one just feels kind of like, say goodbye for like 5 seconds, and then let's get going because, we're on top of a fucking RV, we gotta get going. So I don't know. It just felt kind of rushed to me. I didn't really feel the ending was that impactful in that sense. So I feel like it should have been a little bit more. I feel like it should have been a little bit more longer, just for like the appreciation of like what those two characters have gone through from like the beginning. Well, not the beginning, from the first movie all the way to the fourth. I feel like that transition just kind of got lost in transition. I think I should have said, but go ahead, Tyrone.
Oh no, that's pretty much it. I mean, like. We could go on and on this one, but obviously we can't because of time constraints. I just don't like how this one ultimately sort of. It's mostly the fact that of 3. If you watch 3, you realize the importance of everything here. So to mess with that closure for the sake of Woody needs to get laid is like it's not a good premise to me. It's not. It feels like a lot was out of its way, even like with the human characters, and we never had to really comment much on the human characters in the first 3 movies. Why? Because they were in and out. They did little things here and there. We didn't even really mention Al, but that's because Al is a force of nature. He's meant to like be the transition from one spot to the other. But here we have to we kind of gotta bring up the people because the toys go out of their way to mess and interfere with the course of the people to literally drag the plot towards where it needs to be. They mess with the van 100 times. They put it in ridiculous situations. They flatten the tire. They do all this nonsense so that they can get the human characters in the same spot where Woody and the others are so that they can reunite just so that Woody can tell them, yo, I gotta go. Like, it's so much interference that is unnatural and feels jarring. Whereas in the other movies, yeah, interferences happen, but they were very subtle, and they always did it in a way to where like the world could still like function without much of a question of, well, what just happened there? Nobody really gets an answer why the van was controlling itself and like all these police cars were behind it. No police officers take affirmative action or anything. They just comedically follow behind the RV. But in movie 1, Sid's traumatized because the toys exist, but nobody but Sid sees it. So when Sid says something, everybody else just thinks he's crazy. So it still happens in a way to where you can like buy it happening. Whereas here, the toys have literally taken full control of a goddamn RV, and we gotta just sit here and accept that the human characters need to be idiots in order for this situation to happen. Everybody's oblivious. No one's checking the driver's seat. No one's checking the RV for the system controls. Nobody's checking the circuit breakers. Nobody's checking anything. This is just a weird phenomenon we happen to be in. Honestly, like a human thing to do after going through that RV struggle would never be to drive that RV again. But they're doing it. Why? Because the movie's over and they don't need that anymore. It's just a mess.
It really is a mess. And obviously, like Tyrone said, we'd be here for hours just kind of like shitting on it. But we're all busy men. And so we do got to go. And obviously, normally I would take the time to... Actually, if you guys want to plug your social medias, you can. But other than that, I'm pretty much good to go. So, Terrell, you be the first one. Plug your shit.
The Insane Game Freak on YouTube and Twitch. Actually, by the time you're watching this, I'll be streaming in like 5 minutes.
Yes.
They won't be fucking... By the time they're watching it, I'll already have been streamed some more. I don't fucking know. Insane Game Freak on YouTube and Twitch. At The Game Manic on Twitter. At Schizomanic on YouTube for Pokemon Journeys today. Episode reviews.
Ooh.
And yeah, that was the gameplay to win. Thank you, God. Thank you for having me, Richie. Good night, Tyrone.
Plug the
All
shit.
right, TyroneTheGod3 or TyroneTG3, either one works on all social medias. That's Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. You can catch my streams. I'll be streaming tomorrow, Digimon Cyber Sleuth on 7 p.m. Central on Sunday. And then on Tuesday, we do Tabletop. Wednesday is Weekly Wednesday. And Thursday is Throwdown Thursdays, all 7 p.m. Central. Make sure you check that out. Also, I'll be doing the Nuzlocke run for Pokemon Y on Tuesday. So make sure you guys go check all of those fun things out on Twitch, and join me on the Pokepod on Monday at 9 p.m. Central.
Right, of course. Now, obviously, of course, this might be uploaded different days, so might not be too accurate. But for the most part, do check out these guys' stuff. I will actually put in the editing process, put up the screen of our ratings for each of the movies, but I'll do that on another time because we do gotta go. But thank you guys so much for watching for today's video. If you do like it, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know how you feel about the movies yourself. Like, did you feel like these movies were good, bad, and if so, why do you feel that way? With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we gotta get going. Thank you guys so much for hopping on, and I'll see you guys next time for another video and another stream. And as CSS always says, wash your fucking hands. All right, everyone.
Motherfucking hands.
Yes.
Right.
And with that being said, have a great night, everyone, and I'll see you guys next time.
Yes, sir.